let's talk about the science of scheming. So I think there are roughly sort of 5 different levels of safety that I have in mind. So whack-a-mole is whenever we find a problem, we literally train against that example. Unfortunately, this is a level that I have to talk about. Hill climber. So if we find a problem, then we make a benchmark and that represents that problem, and then we hill climb against that benchmark. That's also something that I would say is kind of maybe even the most common practice right now in general. Then what I call medium fix, which is whenever we find a problem, then we roughly try to match the cause in training and remove or improve that environment or training step. So the kind of thing I have in mind here is, let's say you realize late into a training run, like some weird behavior, and then you're like, okay, I've seen the training, like the post-training environments. This kind of thing roughly matches this other part in the training. So maybe we can just go back and like change this environment, and then either you rerun it from there, or you kind of change a bunch of things in the next iteration, and then hope that it goes away. Then scientific understanding based on empirical trends, by which I mean we have like an explicit scientific model of which parts in training cause which problems, and we can make we can use this to make empirical predictions ahead of time. So I think scaling laws are the most canonical example of this, where my feeling is, like you can say, or we roughly know with data, compute, size of the model, and a bunch of other input factors, like roughly what level of capabilities we're going to get out of the model before we even start the run. And I think, this is a level that we currently don't have in safety. And then the final one is sort of grounded theory, where you can compute worst case bounds. You have like very rigorous models and so on. And so my feeling is roughly this. We're somewhere between the hill climber and the medium fix. Some people are still at the whack-a-mole, unfortunately. And then the scientific understanding based on rigorous mathematical models, the like very theoretical part, I think is impossibly hard in time. And what we're aiming for with the science of scheming is this fourth level of like trying to do these scaling laws for scheming. There's another way of like why we arrived at the science of scheming as like a really important component. So I think all labs are currently pursuing some form of this plan where they first try to make human level AGI and kind of rush to that. Implicitly, there's the assumption that this AGI has to be safe for this plan to work. Then you use this AGI to solve alignment, not further specified. And then after like once alignment is solved, you can scale to ASI. And I think like this implicit assumption of 1A, like ensure that the AGI is safe, is like really important to get right, and because the rest of the plan doesn't work if that isn't the case. And I think the minimal criteria for 1A is the AGI is not actively scheming against you. So you kind of have to know under which conditions the AI would scheme against you. So when scheming would arise. And then once we understand this and have things like scaling laws for scheming or something like this, then we can make sure that these conditions are not present. And I think like the earlier levels in the ladder here, they do not have this property. So whack-a-mole or hill climber, or even maybe medium fix, don't really allow you to make positive statements. They only allow you to talk about the absence of evidence. And the hope is that with science of scheming, you could get positive evidence. You can say something like, we understand the training process well enough and like how scheming and misalignment and other things are arising, that we can predict under which conditions it would happen, and then change or ensure that these conditions are not the case. And so the kind of things we think about for scaling laws of scheming are like in the most abstract sense, like if you assume that the severity or frequency of scheming goes up, then this might come from a bunch of different components, or it could also go down. And now we're trying to understand what are all of these components and how do they track over time, and also how do they change as a function of different inputs to training. So for example, right now, I think at least a relevant component of like the kind of proxy scheming that we're seeing in current models, or like early forms of scheming, it's just imitating some form of deception from pre-training. It's sort of not very coherent. not very strategic, and I expect that to go down over time. And then alignment faking, for example, I think basically we're like we have like sort of a few examples of alignment faking in sort of very vacuum settings, but sort of no alignment faking or strong alignment faking in the real world. And I expect, like, if sort of some of the theory about scheming is true, then I expect that to go up pretty sharply. Misaligned training incentives, the same. And so the whole point is to make very explicit predictions and then test them in practice and see whether they would work. So here are two examples of possible trends. Power seeking as a function of RL horizon length. What I mean by that is, if you train your models on 3-hour tasks, coding tasks, it's very unlikely that they would learn something like, and in order to solve that task, I need to take over the world, or that they become extremely power seeking. But if you give them like very open-ended, very long horizon tasks, things like make me a lot of money on the stock market, and then you just like let the RL rip, then I think it's much more likely that that the models will learn these kind of power-seeking tendencies. And so one prediction here would be, or hypothesis, let's say, is that horizon length increases scheming on average. Or reward seeking as a function of RL diversity. The intuition here is, let's say you have like a handful of like very narrow math problems there, and kind of the same skill roughly is needed to solve all of those. Then you would expect that plausibly the model will learn exactly that skill. Now let's say you have like one math environment and one biology environment, and then like very far away environments. Now it's possible that the best way to solve these environments is not to learn the object level skill, but rather to reason about what the grader will reward, because that's how you sort of technically speaking solve the environment. And so again, this is sort of a prediction that we're testing here, or want to test in more detail. Now, I think in general, there is sort of justified skepticism about this, and our argument for why this is should be possible is that the core arguments for scheming, I think, are instrumental convergence and other reasons that are very general, where my intuition is, if they are true and if they would lead to very concerning behavior, then you should be able to strip away all the details and focus on the big convergent phenomena and so on. And then the other reason is just, in machine learning, there seem to be a lot of predictable patterns. Often initially we don't understand where they come from. People look into it, and then at some point we have surprisingly clean log-log graphs. So here is kind of the reward-seeking example again. This is what I meant with the RL training diversity environment. So you would have the number of training environments on the x-axis, and here the assumption is at some point this kind of flips, where it's now better to think about what the grader wants than to solve the object level task. And the hope is that we have some sort of clean functions and sort of these empirical scaling laws that would show what the probability of oversight gaming is given something on the x-axis. And so the hard part is now, what is the thing on the x-axis? And we have a few hypotheses for this that we're actively testing right now. And so far we've already found a bunch of surprisingly clean results. But yeah, there's a lot more to do. Final thoughts. So 1 year ago, we actually had a discussion about whether we should do the signs of scheming at Apollo, and I was against it. And I think a bunch of important things changed since then. So the first one is, I became more pessimistic about the whack-a-mole strategy and the sort of just iterate against your empirical signals strategy. And then the second one is, we thought in much more detail, or other people at Apollo thought in much more detail about what the signs of scheming would look like. And I update very hard that is actually quite feasible. Now that, everyone's training with a lot of RL, and there are a lot of RL environments and knowledge about RL out there, it suddenly just seems very plausible to run a bunch of empirical experiments. And the third reason is, we just see a lot of things in practice, like terminal training gaming, like this, thinking about what the grader wants, that we can study, and this makes empirical iteration possible. And I think empirical iteration is really, really important for this, because otherwise you can't really find the scaling laws. It's very hard to do that in a vacuum. All right. Thanks.